The morning sun beat down on Frontier Station 7's livestock market, turning the dusty ground into a shimmering haze of heat. Colin wiped sweat from his forehead as he examined the pigs in the metal enclosure before him. They looked healthy enough, good breeding stock for his farm on the colony's outer rim. "These two will do," Colin said, gesturing to a pair of spotted sows. "What's your price?" The trader, a hulking Halvian named Grek, scratched his chin with a thick finger. His skin had the gray, leathery texture common to his species, and his small eyes gleamed with calculation. 400 credits for the pair. Good animals, strong bloodlines. Colin knew the game. He crossed his arms and shook his head. 300. I've seen better stock at the southern markets. 375, and that's my final offer, Grek countered. They haggled for another few minutes, the familiar dance of buyer and seller, until they settled on 350 credits. Colin pulled out his payment chip, ready to transfer the funds, when Grek suddenly grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Tell you what, human. I'll throw in a bonus. No extra charge." Grek jerked his thumb toward the back corner of his stall. Colin followed the gesture and noticed a small cage he hadn't seen before, half hidden behind stacks of feed containers. Inside was something that made his stomach turn. A creature, clearly alien, lay curled in a space barely large enough for her body. Her skin, what he could see of it beneath layers of filth and matted fur, had a strange quality to it. She wasn't moving. "What is that?" Colin asked, moving closer despite himself. "Myron female. Worthless species, evolutionary dead end. Had her for 3 months, can't sell her, can't even give her away." Grek spat on the ground. "You take her, saves me disposal fees. Station charges 20 credits to process biological waste." Colin knelt beside the cage. The alien was breathing, he could see that now, but each breath seemed labored. Her ribs showed clearly through her skin. One eye opened slightly and he saw it focus on him. The eye was remarkable, even in her terrible condition. It held an amber color with flecks of gold, and in that brief glance, Colin saw something that made his heart clench. Intelligence. Awareness. Fear. "She's dying," Colin said quietly. "Probably," Grek agreed without concern. "Myron can't adapt, that's their problem. Weak constitution, no useful skills, no place in the modern galaxy. Scientists say they're genetic refuse, left over from some failed evolutionary branch. Do me a favor and haul her away." Another trader, a human woman Colin didn't recognize, laughed from the neighboring stall. "You're not actually considering it, are you? I had one of those things last year. Died within a week despite everything I tried. Waste of space and resources." "Should have just spaced it," a third voice chimed in, belonging to a reptilian saurian merchant. "That's what I do with defective stock. Quick, clean, efficient." Colin looked back at the cage. The alien had closed her eye again, but he could still feel her awareness. She knew they were talking about her. She understood that her life meant nothing to these people, that she was being discussed like broken equipment. His father's voice echoed in his memory, "The measure of a person isn't what they do when people are watching, son. It's what they do when nobody would know the difference. Nobody would know if he left her here. Nobody would care. She was just another casualty of the frontier's harsh realities, another being that didn't fit into the neat categories of useful or profitable. But Colin would know. "I'll take her," he said, standing up. Grek blinked in surprise. "Seriously? Human, I'm telling you she's worthless. You'd be doing yourself a favor too." "I said I'll take her." Colin's voice was firm. "Load her with the pigs." The female trader shook her head in disbelief. "Your funeral friend. Don't say we didn't warn you." Colin completed the payment transfer and watched as Grek's workers loaded the 2 pigs into his transport's cargo area. They handled the animals with reasonable care. When they got to the cage with the Myron, they simply grabbed it and threw it onto the transport bed with a careless toss. Colin heard a small sound from inside, quickly cut off. "Careful with that," Colin snapped. The worker, a young Halvian, sneered. "It's trash, human. Who cares?" "I care. Handle it gently or don't handle it at all." The worker rolled his eyes but complied, setting the cage down with marginally more care. Colin secured it properly, making sure it wouldn't slide around during the journey. As he worked, he became aware of that amber eye watching him again. The trip back to his farm took 40 minutes across the rough terrain of the colony's agricultural zone. Colin drove carefully, avoiding the worst of the potholes and rocky patches. Every few minutes, he glanced at the small cage in his rear display screen. Halfway home, he saw movement. The Myron had shifted position slightly, turning so she could see out through the bars. Her eye was open now, tracking the landscape passing by. Was this the first time she'd been outside in months? How long had Greg kept her in that cage? Colin's jaw tightened at the thought. As his farm came into view, a modest collection of buildings surrounded by crop fields and animal enclosures, Colin realized he had absolutely no idea what he was going to do with her. He knew nothing about Myran biology. He didn't know what she ate, what temperature she needed, whether the colony's atmosphere was even safe for her to breathe for extended periods. He'd acted on instinct and conscience, but now practical reality was setting in. Colin parked the transport near his barn and began unloading. The pigs went first, guided into their new pen with practiced ease. Then he stood before the small cage, looking down at its occupant. The Myran looked back at him. She was fully conscious now, he could tell. Her body was tense, ready for pain or cruelty because that's what she'd learned to expect. "I'm not going to hurt you," Colin said softly, knowing she couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone might convey something. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try to help." He carefully lifted the cage, genuinely shocked at how light it was. She couldn't weigh much at all. Starvation had reduced her to almost nothing. As he carried her into the barn, toward the quarantine section he used for sick animals, Colin made a silent promise. He didn't know if she would survive. He didn't know if he could even figure out how to care for her properly. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would never be treated as worthless again. Not while he had anything to say about it. The amber eyes watched him, and for just a moment, he thought he saw the fear in them lessen. Just slightly. Just enough. Colin set the cage down in the quarantine section of his barn, a clean area he normally used for sick animals or new arrivals that needed observation. The space had good ventilation, temperature control, and enough room for the Myran to move around once he could safely release her from that terrible cage. First, he needed information. Colin pulled out his datapad and accessed the Frontier Colonies database. He typed in Myran species, and waited for results. The information was sparse and contradictory. One source claimed Myran were herbivores. Another said they needed protein. A third suggested they absorbed nutrients directly through their skin. The medical data was worse, offering nothing useful about their biology or care requirements. What he did find was disturbing. 50 years ago, the Myran had been mentioned in galactic records as mathematicians and energy specialists, respected for their intellectual contributions. Then, suddenly references to them dropped off. The recent entries he could find used words like declined species and evolutionary failure. Something about that didn't sit right with Colin, but he had more immediate concerns. The alien in the cage was dying, and he needed to figure out how to feed her. He started with water. Clean, fresh water was essential for most living things. Colin filled a shallow dish and carefully opened the cage door, moving slowly and speaking in a low, calm voice. "It's just water. You must be thirsty." The Myran pressed herself against the back of the cage, her whole body trembling. When Colin reached in with the dish, she made a sound he'd never heard before, a high-pitched keening that spoke of pure terror. He stopped immediately and withdrew his hand. "Okay, I understand. I'll leave it here by the door." Colin placed the dish just inside the cage opening and backed away several feet. He sat down on a nearby hay bale and waited, not moving, barely breathing. After 20 minutes, when she seemed convinced he wasn't going to attack, the Myran slowly crept forward. Her movements were painful to watch, weak and shaking. She reached the dish and drank with desperate gulps. That first day set the pattern. Colin would bring food and water, move slowly, speak quietly, and give her space. He tried everything he could think of: fruits, vegetables, grains, even small portions of protein paste. She refused most of it, sometimes violently flinching away as if the food itself might hurt her. On the second day he noticed she'd eaten some of the grain mixture he'd left. It wasn't much, just a few bites, but it was something. He prepared more of the same, adjusting the consistency and adding water to make it softer. The third day brought a small breakthrough. Colin had been sitting nearby, working on repair orders for his equipment and talking to her about nothing in particular. He discovered that his voice seemed to calm her slightly, so he just spoke about his day, the weather, the pigs adjusting to their new home. "The bigger sow, I'm thinking of calling her Maple," he said, not looking directly at the Myran. "She's got a good temperament. The other one's more nervous, reminds me of you actually." When he finally glanced over, he saw that the Myran had moved closer to the front of the cage. She was watching him with those remarkable amber eyes. For the first time she wasn't pressed against the back wall in terror. By the fourth day, Colin decided it was time to address the layers of filth covering her. He couldn't properly assess her health or even see what she really looked like under all that grime. But he knew this would be difficult. She barely tolerated his presence, and this would require him to touch her. He prepared warm water, soft cloths, and a gentle cleaning solution he used for newborn animals. Then he approached the cage and sat beside it. "I need to clean you," he said softly. "I'll be as gentle as I can, but you're covered in dirt and waste. It can't be comfortable, and it might be making you sick." The Myron watched him but didn't retreat. Colin took that as permission, or at least as lack of refusal. He opened the cage fully and reached in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When his hand touched her shoulder, she flinched hard, that same terrified keening sound escaping her throat. But she didn't lash out or try to escape. Colin realized with a heavy heart that she'd been conditioned to accept whatever was done to her. She expected pain, but knew resistance only made things worse. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for whatever they did to you." He worked carefully, wiping away the dirt and matted material that covered her. The water in his bucket turned dark brown, then black. He changed it 3 times. As he cleaned, he began to see what had been hidden beneath. Her skin wasn't just skin. It had a crystalline quality with patterns that caught the light. They were geometric and precise, flowing across her body in designs that seemed both natural and mathematical. Where he'd cleaned her arm, he could see the patterns clearly. Hexagons connecting to triangles, connecting to more complex shapes he couldn't name. Her bone structure was elegant, almost delicate. She had 4 fingers on each hand, longer than human fingers, with joints in places that seemed unusual. Her face, once he'd cleaned it, had features that were somehow both alien and beautiful. Large eyes, a small nose, a mouth that seemed expressive even in her current state of fear. The 5th day arrived, and Colin maintained his routine. Food in the morning, fresh water, quiet conversation while he worked nearby. He'd moved her to a larger enclosure now, with soft bedding and room to move. She could leave the cage if she wanted, though she rarely did. That evening, Colin brought her dinner, the grain mixture she'd been tolerating, enhanced with some vegetable proteins he'd carefully prepared. He set it down inside her enclosure and turned to leave, giving her privacy to eat. "Colin." He froze. The word was barely audible, more breath than sound, and heavily accented. But it was his name. She'd heard him say it during his one-sided conversations, and she'd remembered it. He turned slowly. The Myron was looking at him directly, no longer cowering. In her eyes he saw something different than fear. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the possibility of trust. "Yes," he said gently. She gestured to the food, then to her mouth, then made a sound that might have been gratitude. Then, while he watched in amazement, she picked up the bowl and began to eat. Not the desperate, furtive bites she'd been taking when she thought he wasn't looking. Real eating, steady and deliberate. She consumed the entire portion, the first full meal she'd eaten since arriving at his farm. When she finished, she made another sound, a soft musical note that was completely different from the keening fear sound. Colin smiled. "You're welcome," he said. For the first time in what might have been years, the Myron female wasn't alone in her suffering. And for the first time since he'd brought her home, Colin felt genuine hope that she might actually survive. 3 weeks of proper food and care had transformed the Myron beyond recognition. The crystalline patterns on her skin now glowed with a faint inner light, pulsing gently like a slow heartbeat. She moved with grace instead of pain, and her amber eyes were bright and alert. She gained weight, her frame filling out to show the elegant proportions her species was meant to have. Colin was in the barn repairing a fence panel when he heard her voice, clear and strong now, calling from her enclosure. "Colin, come please." He set down his tools and walked over. She was standing, something she did easily now, her posture straight and confident. The frightened, broken creature from the cage seemed like a distant memory. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked. She told him her name a week ago, speaking it carefully and making him repeat it until he got the pronunciation right. Since then, her grasp of his language had exploded with shocking speed. She learned new words daily, assembling them into increasingly complex sentences. "I need to explain," Sarah said, gesturing for him to sit. "You deserve to know what I am. What my people were." Colin sat on a hay bale, and Sarah settled onto the floor of her enclosure, her legs crossed in a position that looked meditative. "My people, the Myron, we were mathematicians. We understood patterns in ways others could not." She held up her hand, and the crystalline patterns on her skin pulsed brighter. "These marks, they are not decoration. They are, how do you say, computational structures. Living mathematics." "I don't understand," Colin admitted. "We could see energy," Sarah explained, her eyes growing distant with memory. "Not just light but all energy. Heat, electricity, motion, potential. We could see the mathematical patterns that govern how energy moves and changes. And with practice we could manipulate those patterns. She looked at him intently. 50 years ago, my people discovered something important. We found a way to make energy production much more efficient. Almost free. We were excited to share this knowledge with the galaxy. Colin felt a cold sensation in his stomach. What happened? There are corporations, powerful ones, who control energy production across many systems. They sell power at high prices, make enormous profits. Our discovery would have destroyed their business. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. They could not allow that. So they killed you all, Colin said quietly. Not at first. First came the propaganda. Scientists were paid to publish papers calling us evolutionary failures. News reports said our abilities were myths, that we were dying out naturally due to genetic weakness. They made the galaxy believe we were worthless. Sarah's voice trembled with anger and grief. Then came the hunters. They captured us, killed many, sold others into slavery. But there was a problem. Even captive Myron could use their abilities if healthy. So they starved you, Colin said, understanding dawning. Yes. Starvation suppresses our abilities, makes us weak and helpless. The traitors who captured us learned this. Keep us barely alive, keep us useless, and no one questions what happens to us. Sarah looked at him with gratitude. You saved my life, Colin. Not just from death, but from that terrible emptiness. You gave me back myself. Colin shook his head. I just fed you and kept you safe. Anyone would have done the same. No. Sarah's voice was firm. The traders at that market, they all knew what I was. They all chose to see me as worthless. You chose differently. That choice matters. She stood and moved to the edge of her enclosure. My abilities are returning. I can feel them growing stronger each day. Would you like to see? Colin nodded, curious despite himself. Sarah closed her eyes, and the patterns on her skin began to glow brighter, shifting and changing like living geometry. She held out her hands, palms up, and Colin saw something impossible. The air above her hands shimmered, and small points of light appeared, dancing in precise formations. I can see the energy all around us, she whispered. In the walls, in the ground, in your body. Everything has patterns, everything moves and flows. It is beautiful beyond words. The lights above her hands faded, and she opened her eyes. But I am still weak. Before I could do much more. With time and health, I will recover fully. A loud mechanical whine interrupted them. Colin's workshop generator, which had been sputtering for days, finally gave up with a grinding sound and went silent. The lights in the barn flickered and died. Damn it, Colin muttered. I've been meaning to fix that thing. May I try? Sarah asked. Colin looked at her in surprise. The generator? It's completely broken, needs new parts one don't have. Please, let me try. They walked to the workshop together. The generator sat in the corner, a bulky piece of equipment that powered Colin's tools and the barn systems. Colin had opened the casing days ago and identified the problem. A burned-out power coupling and damaged energy regulation circuits. Both needed replacement. Sarah approached the generator and placed her hands on its metal housing. She closed her eyes, and the patterns on her skin blazed with light. Colin watched in amazement as the glow spread from her hands into the generator itself, flowing through the machinery like liquid fire. I can see the damage, Sarah murmured. The energy pathways are broken, but the breaks are not complex. The pattern wants to flow, it just needs guidance. The crystalline light pulsed brighter, and Colin heard a humming sound building inside the generator. Sarah's face showed intense concentration, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool air. Come on, she whispered. Flow. Remember the pattern. Remember how you should work. With a sudden word, the generator roared to life. The lights in the barn blazed on. Every gauge on the machine's display showed perfect, optimal readings. Sarah stumbled backward and Colin caught her before she fell. That should not have been possible, she said, breathing hard but smiling. The parts were destroyed. But I convinced the energy to flow anyway, made it remember the correct pattern. It will not last forever, you still need real repairs, but for now. A different sound cut through the air. The unmistakable roar of a spacecraft engine descending. Colin and Sarah rushed to the barn door and looked up to see a transport ship, identical to the one Greg had used at the market, settling down in the field outside Colin's farm. The cargo ramp lowered and Greg emerged, flanked by two other Halvians Colin didn't recognize. They were bigger than Greg, muscular and armed with shock batons at their belts. Greg's eyes fixed on Sarah, and his expression twisted into a greedy smile. "Hello, human," Greg called out. "I've come to correct a mistake. That Myron belongs to me and I'm taking her back." Colin stepped forward, placing himself between Greg and the barn where Sarah stood. His heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady and firm. "She's not yours anymore, Greg. You gave her to me, remember? Free of charge to save disposal fees." Greg's smile didn't waver. He pulled out a data pad and waved it casually. "Ah, but that's where you're wrong, human. I've reviewed the transfer documents. There's a clause about defective merchandise. If the product shows unexpected value, the original owner retains reclamation rights within 60 days. "That's garbage," Colin said. "Frontier law is clear. Once livestock is delivered and payment accepted, ownership transfers completely. No returns, no reclamations." One of the armed Halvians, a brute with a scarred face, stepped forward. "Listen, farmer. We don't want trouble. Just hand over the Myron and we'll leave peacefully." "Not happening." Greg sighed dramatically. "Colin, let me explain something. 3 days ago, I was contacted by a representative of the Zenith Energy Consortium. Apparently, someone noticed unusual energy signatures coming from this region. When they investigated, they traced it here." His eyes gleamed. "They're very interested in your pet Myron. Interested enough to pay me 50,000 credits to retrieve her." "So this is about money," Colin said. "This is about much more than money," Greg replied. "The consortium explained something fascinating. Myron aren't worthless at all. They're dangerous. Their abilities could destabilize the entire galactic energy market. The consortium has been working for decades to eliminate this threat, and I'm not about to let one slip through their fingers." "You mean they've been committing genocide?" Colin said coldly. Greg shrugged. "I prefer to think of it as market stabilization. Either way, the Myron comes with us. Now, we can do this peacefully or my associates can encourage your cooperation." He gestured to the 2 armed Halvians who moved their hands to their shock batons. "Under Frontier Colony Law, Section 47, Article 12, Colin said loudly, transferred ownership of biological property is permanent and irrevocable once delivery is confirmed and payment accepted. I have the transaction record on file with the station authority. You have no legal claim." The second armed Halvian, younger than the first, looked uncertain. "Boss, if the law says..." "The law says what the consortium wants it to say," Greg snapped. "Now stop wasting time. Get the Myron." The 2 Halvians started toward the barn. Colin tensed, knowing he couldn't physically stop them but unwilling to move aside. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Then Sarah stepped out of the barn. She walked with calm confidence, her head held high. The crystalline patterns covering her skin weren't just glowing anymore, they were blazing with brilliant light that pulsed and shifted in complex geometric formations. Her amber eyes seemed to shine with inner fire. "Stop," she said, and her voice carried a resonance that made everyone freeze. Greg's confident expression faltered. "What the? How is she this strong? She should be barely functional." "You kept me starved for 3 months," Sarah said, walking forward. "But Colin has fed me, cared for me, treated me as a person instead of trash. My abilities have returned. Not fully, not yet, but enough." The scarred Halvian activated his shock baton, electricity crackling along its length. "Stay back or I'll drop you where you stand." Sarah tilted her head, studying him. "You rely on electrical current running through conductive channels to generate your weapon's charge. Interesting design, but inefficient." She raised one hand, fingers spread, and the patterns on her skin flared brighter. The Halvian's shock baton sputtered, sparked, and went dead. He stared at it in shock. "What did you do?" "I disrupted the energy pattern. The flow no longer follows the correct pathways." Sarah turned her gaze to the second Halvian, whose baton died before he could even activate it. "Your weapons are useless now." Greg backed toward his ship, pulling out a communications device. "This changes nothing. The consortium will send more hunters, better equipped. You can't fight them all." Sarah walked toward the ship, and with each step, her glow intensified. "Your ship operates on a standard fusion drive system, correct? With power distribution networks running throughout the hull." Greg's eyes widened in understanding and fear. "Don't you dare." Sarah placed her hand on the ship's hull, and the entire vessel lit up with cascading light as energy patterns flowed through its structure. Inside, Colin could hear systems shutting down, alerts blaring, and then sudden silence as everything went dark. "Your ship will not fly until I allow it to," Sarah said calmly. "The energy patterns have been redirected. No permanent damage, but you are grounded." The scarred Halvian pulled out a blade, something that didn't rely on electronics. "Consortium doesn't pay us to give up easy," he growled, advancing on Sarah. A sharp crack echoed across the field. Everyone turned to see Colin's neighbor, a grizzled farmer named Walter, standing at the edge of the property with a plasma rifle aimed at the sky. "Heard ship engines," Walter called out. Figured Colin might need some help. 2 more neighbors emerged from the nearby fields, both armed. Then another appeared from the road. Within minutes, a dozen of Colin's neighbors had arrived, all carrying weapons and all looking decidedly unfriendly toward the intruders. Frontier colonies were built on mutual support. When one farmer had trouble, others came running. It was the only way to survive on the edge of civilized space. "Looks like you boys aren't welcome here," Walter said, his rifle now pointed at Greg. "Frontier law is pretty clear about claim jumping and property theft. We take a dim view of outsiders trying to steal from our neighbors." Greg looked around at the armed colonists, at his disabled ship, at Sarah standing there glowing like a living star. His confident swagger had completely evaporated. "This isn't over," he said, trying to salvage some dignity. "The consortium has resources you can't imagine. They'll come for her, and when they do, your little farming community won't be enough to stop them." "Maybe," Colin said. "But today, right now, you're leaving empty-handed." "Sarah stays with me." Greg pointed at Sarah. "Fix my ship." "No," Sarah replied simply. "You can't keep us here. That's illegal detention." Walter chuckled. "You'll find that colony communications are having some technical difficulties. Might take a few days to get a message out. Might take a week for any response to arrive. Plenty of time for you to walk back to the station. It's only about 40 kilometers. The 2 armed Halvians looked at each other, then at their boss, clearly not eager for a long walk through rough terrain. Sarah's glow faded slightly. "I will restore your ship's basic functions on one condition. You leave now and tell the consortium exactly what you saw here. Tell them the Myron are not helpless anymore. Tell them we remember what they did to us." "They'll only send more hunters," Greg muttered. "Let them come," Sarah said. "I will be ready." The ship's systems hummed back to life. Greg and his associates climbed aboard quickly, eager to escape. As the ship lifted off, Greg's voice came through the external speakers. "The consortium always gets what it wants, human. Always." The ship disappeared into the sky, leaving Colin and Sarah standing in the field, surrounded by armed neighbors. Walter lowered his rifle and walked over. "So, Colin, want to tell us what that was all about?" Colin looked at Sarah, then at his neighbors and sighed. The simple life he'd known was over. The fight, he realized, was just beginning. Colin sat at his kitchen table with 2 visitors he'd never imagined hosting. Lydia was a frontier rights lawyer from the Central Hub, a sharp woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Beside her sat Martin, an independent journalist whose reports from the frontier colonies had exposed corporate abuses before. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Lydia said, reviewing her notes. "The Zenith Energy Consortium has been systematically exterminating an entire species to protect their market monopoly?" "That's what Sarah told me," Colin confirmed. "And what Greg admitted before he left." Martin's recording device sat on the table between them, capturing everything. "This is the story of the decade if we can prove it. But we'll need evidence, documentation, witnesses." Sarah entered the kitchen carrying a tray with tea. Her movements were graceful now, completely recovered. The crystalline patterns on her skin glowed softly in the morning light. She set down the tray and sat beside Colin. "I can provide testimony," she said. "And I can demonstrate what my people could do, what the consortium feared enough to kill us for." "A demonstration would be powerful," Lydia agreed. "But it needs to be public, witnessed by enough people that the consortium can't suppress it." Walter, who'd stayed close since the confrontation with Greg, leaned against the doorframe. "The colony's having its quarterly gathering in 3 days. Usually get about 500 people from all the surrounding farms. Would that work?" Martin smiled. "Perfect." 3 days later, the colony's central square was packed with curious farmers and their families. Word had spread about something important happening, and the frontier people were always hungry for news and entertainment. Colin stood on a makeshift stage, feeling deeply uncomfortable with all the attention. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice amplified by speakers. "I want to introduce you to someone. Her name is Sarah, and she's a Myron." Sarah stepped onto the stage and the crowd murmured. Many had heard rumors about Colin's alien, but few had seen her. In the sunlight, her crystalline skin patterns created rainbow effects that were mesmerizing. 3 weeks ago, I was given to Colin as worthless trash, Sarah began, her accented voice clear and strong. Traders told him my species was an evolutionary failure, genetic refuse with no value. This was a lie. She raised her hands and the patterns on her skin blazed bright. My people were mathematicians and energy workers. We discovered something the galaxy needed to know. We found a way to make energy production efficient and cheap, almost free for everyone. A farmer in the crowd shouted, "If that's true, why haven't we heard about it?" "Because the corporations that sell you energy at high prices did not want you to know," Sarah replied. "They could not compete with free energy, so they destroyed my people instead. They killed us, enslaved us, called us worthless to hide their crime." Martin's cameras captured everything as Sarah walked to the colony's main power generator, a massive unit that powered the entire settlement. "This generator burns fuel, creates waste, requires constant maintenance, and costs you greatly. Let me show you what Myron mathematics can do." She placed both hands on the generator's housing, and her entire body lit up like a star. The patterns on her skin moved and shifted in dizzying complexity, spreading from her hands into the machinery itself. The generator's rumbling changed, becoming smoother, quieter. "I am optimizing the energy flow patterns," Sarah explained, her voice strained with effort. "Reducing waste, improving efficiency, teaching the system how to use what it has more effectively." The generator's display screens showed impossible numbers. Fuel consumption dropped by half, then 2/3, then 3/4. Power output increased. Waste heat decreased. The crowd pressed closer, watching in amazement. Sarah stepped back, breathing hard. "This will last several months before the patterns degrade. With proper Myron design systems, the improvement would be permanent. Energy could be nearly free, available to everyone, not controlled by corporations." The crowd erupted in excited conversation. Martin's cameras kept rolling as farmers crowded around Sarah, asking questions, marveling at what she'd done. Lydia took the stage next. "What you've witnessed today is why the Zenith Energy Consortium committed genocide. They couldn't allow this knowledge to spread. They made the galaxy believe Myron were worthless so no one would question their extinction." She held up a datapad. "I've filed formal charges with the Frontier Justice Council. This recording and Sarah's testimony will be submitted as evidence. But we need more. If there are other Myron survivors hiding in fear, they need to know it's safe to come forward." Martin stepped up beside her. "This story is going out on every independent news network I can reach. The consortium can't suppress it all. People deserve to know the truth." The response was faster than anyone expected. Within a week, messages started arriving at Colin's farm. The first came from a mining colony 3 systems away. A Myron male named Kellen had been hiding among the workers, pretending to be a different species, terrified of being discovered. Sarah's demonstration had given him hope. Then came more. A Myron female working as a janitor on a space station. A young Myron who'd grown up in hiding, never knowing others of his kind existed. 2 elderly Myron who'd survived by living in the wilderness of an abandoned planet. Each message was the same. They'd thought they were alone, the last of their kind. They'd seen the propaganda calling them worthless and believed they had to hide forever. Now they wanted to come home to be themselves again. The frontier colonies rallied around them. Colony leaders publicly offered protection and settlement rights to any Myron who wanted to come. Public opinion turned sharply against the consortium. People didn't like being manipulated, and they especially didn't like corporations that committed genocide for profit. 6 months after that first demonstration, Sarah stood with Colin in front of a new building on his colony. The Myron Research Center was modest but functional, designed to house the 17 Myron survivors who'd emerged from hiding and wanted to work together. "We will teach others our mathematics," Sarah said, looking at the building with pride. "We will share what the consortium tried to destroy. Energy belongs to everyone, not just to those who can pay." She turned to Colin, who stood there looking uncomfortable in the formal clothes she'd insisted he wear for the dedication ceremony. "None of this would exist without you. You saw value where others saw trash. You gave me back my life, my people, our future." Colin shrugged, embarrassed. "I just did what anyone should do. Fed you, kept you safe, treated you like a person." "Exactly," Sarah said softly. "You did what anyone should do, but what almost no one actually did. Every trader at that market saw me. Every one of them chose to see me as worthless. You chose differently." She gestured to the other Myron gathering for the ceremony, to the crowd of colonists who'd come to support them, to the new building that represented hope. "This is what human decency created. This is what one person's choice to do right accomplished." Colin looked at the pigs in their pen nearby, the two animals that had started everything. Maple, the big sow, was expecting piglets soon. Her companion grazed peacefully in the sun. "I still think I just got lucky," he said. "Bought 2 pigs, got you as a bonus." Sarah laughed, the sound like music. "The traders thought you were foolish for taking worthless trash. But you understood something they did not. Value is not always obvious. Sometimes the most precious things come disguised as garbage, and it takes human wisdom to see the truth." She placed her hand on his shoulder, her crystalline patterns glowing warmly. "In trying to eliminate my people, the consortium forgot something important. They forgot that there are still humans like you in this galaxy. Humans who will do what is right simply because it is right. Humans who cannot walk past suffering without stopping to help." Colin smiled. "That's just being decent." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "And that decency, that simple human choice to care, saved an entire species. Never underestimate the value of doing right, Colin. It changes everything." In the pig pen, Maple grunted contentedly, and somewhere in the research center, Myron voices rose in mathematical harmony, calculating patterns that would light the galaxy. And Colin, simple farmer, went back to his work, knowing that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the most ordinary acts of kindness.